It started with a night of drinking. There was an argument in the bar, some college bar, where the students all hung out. It continued back to their apartment. What was the argument about? Connor Sally would never quite remember. It was something so inconsequential that it never should have taken place, but mixed with alcohol it did, and then it escalated. He'd walked out onto the balcony to cool off, but Julia had followed. She was intensely upset. In his foggy mind, he knew that tomorrow this would all dissipate into a hazy memory. But as of now, this was consuming them. He told her to just leave him alone. She told him to admit it. He remembered that much. And when she came towards him, he remembered that he grabbed her and pushed her hard into the railing of the balcony. He instantly saw her eyes turn from anger to fear, and then he heard something. It sounded like a tiny snap, then a crack, and in a single instant, Julia was falling backward. He reached out to grab her flailing arm, but he stumbled. He was clumsy, still from the drinking, and he could only watch as she fell 10 floors to the parked cars below. He crawled over on his quivering knees and he looked down. A car alarm was blowing. It just kept repeating the noise, the honking sound, louder than he'd ever heard an alarm before. Her tangled limbs, her body oddly resting on the windshield of a blue Toyota, her eyes open. He felt as though they were staring right at him and into his soul, boring into his brain. Slowly, blood dripping from her mouth. Connor bolted upright in bed. He was drenched in sweat. He looked around the room. His wife, Alexis, was sleeping beside him, the puffy down comforter piled up around her neck. "What's wrong?" she asked groggily. "Nothing. I'm fine. Just a nightmare." "Go back to sleep," she whispered, while one arm came from underneath the comforter and patted him on his shoulder. Connor hadn't had this nightmare for years. After the fall, the police had come to question him. He'd lied and told them that he'd been in the shower when it happened, that they'd had a small argument at the bar. He'd had to admit that. Everyone had seen them. And then when they got home, he'd taken a shower to get some space. The incident had been investigated, and the police had called it a horrible accident. Connor had tried to forget it as best as he could, but the guilt was always lurking in the back of his mind. He'd sometimes swear that he saw her out of the corner of his eye, in the coffee shop, crossing the road, staring at him during a concert. A couple of hours later, the phone rang, and Alexis grabbed it. "Right. Thank you," she said. "Crap. Connor, the car's going to be here in an hour. We have to get the kids up and get our bags out front. Hurry." They were taking a vacation. Connor, Alexis, his wife of 20 years, their 17-year-old son Anthony, and their 15-year-old daughter Maggie. They were headed to San Jose del Cabo for a week. It was the end of October, and the couple had decided that they'd like some vacation time before the rush of the holidays began. When they arrived, the kids immediately hit the pool, while Connor and Alexis sat in the cabana lounge and started on their first margarita. Connor still couldn't shake his nightmare. He felt unsettled. It had been nearly 22 years ago since the incident, but it would still feel fresh on some days. He was thinking about the night of Julia's death when Alexis asked where his mind had wandered off to. "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just thinking of who's coming for Thanksgiving and where to seat them to lessen the odds of a cantankerous argument between your Uncle Mike and my Aunt Sophia." He forced a chuckle out. "Hey now, we are on this vacation so that we don't have to worry about things like that yet. Drink that margarita already. and she raised her hand and motioned for the bartender to get 2 more. The next day was the beginning of Dia de los Muertos, otherwise known as the Day of the Dead. It's a holiday to celebrate the dead, to pray and remember them, and the kids were excited to go. Connor was still feeling off, but decided that it might be fun and get his mind off his past. Alexis and Maggie had purchased 2 short red dresses with tassels hanging from their arms. They had bright yellow bangles and 2 sugar skull hand fans. Anthony had gone with his everyday shorts, but agreed to wear the sugar skull t-shirt his mother had purchased only if his dad would wear his too, so he did, and they went to the street fair. There were plenty of vendors and traveling musicians, lots of dancing, and Connor was glad that he had decided to go. The smile on his family's faces washed away his tension, and he even found himself holding a pair of maracas and acting silly. A parade started up, so the family stood along the roadside to watch and wave. Maggie was dancing and flowers were being thrown. Connor was feeling very happy as a woman slowly walked up to him. She was wearing a long, flowing red dress that went down to her bare feet and covered her arms. She was wearing a sugar skull mask, intricate and beautiful. Her ankles jingled as she walked with bells around her jewelry, and her fingers covered by rings. Connor felt as though he were in a trance. He no longer heard the loud music and the clapping. She came closer and closer, her body moving, almost slinking towards him, her eyes locked on his. She walked right up to him, and in the very far distance it felt he could hear Alexis speaking. "Connor, are you okay? Honey, you don't look well." And then he recognized those eyes, those lifeless eyes, boring a hole into his soul, searing his brain with the memories of that night. She was Julia. He knew it deep down, but how could it be? His mind was reeling as she slowly reached out her right arm, the rings on her fingers sparkling in the light of the setting sun. He could still faintly hear Alexis, and now he could faintly hear Maggie and Anthony as well. "Dad, Dad, what's going on?" As this woman, Julia, touched him on his chest, he felt a sharp pain burst from his heart, his eyes still locked with hers. He felt his left arm pounding, his consciousness fading. As he went down to the ground, she stood over him, and her eyes were the last thing he saw as he died from what the doctor said was a heart attack.